So I get the pleasure to actually lead this panel as focusing on education, both at PwC as well as having, and I was telling others, having a father who every week who's in the education space says, what in the world are you doing as a big organization? And if you can't make change, who can? So I have to hear that every Sunday at 7 o'clock. And so I decided that it had to be a part of my job somehow. Well, welcome. I don't know if you all were here yesterday, but some of what we had was an education panel. And one of the things that was very clear is that we wanted to make education personal. That the one thing that education had become was something that there was this big issue to it, but with that, nobody knew how to solve it because it was just talking about this huge problem of education. So one of the ways we wanted to start is to say, why education? How did you even get into this as being something that you're passionate about and something that, you know, moving from your work career more formally in the business world to education, why that? And for each of you to say how you even got here to be able to talk about this topic.
Do you want me to start?
That sounds great.
Thank you so much, and not only is it an honor to be here, but many of the people in this room have supported DonorsChoose.org, and I really appreciate it. So I unfortunately have to start with some bad news. The board of directors of Donors Choose is so appreciative, and also this group has such an ability to impact the world that we, the board of Donors Choose, has given each of you a $50 Donors Choose giving card, which is basically free money that you can spend on our site. That's the good news. The bad news is it was intercepted by a bomb-sniffing dog this morning. So we are working on the logistics of trying to get you that gift. It will hopefully happen by the end of the day. So in answer to your question, you know, I think like many of you in this room, I'm the product of a public education, and as a result of that, I know that so many of the opportunities that I had really were important, but I had a really meaningful and deeply transformative experience, which is I met a student in an inner city public school in New York City, and he told me the story of his life and the story of what school had done for him, and I thought maybe we could take that one story and amplify it out through DonorsChoose.org.
Likewise, this is fun for me to sort of share these ideas. Do I press one of these buttons or is it turned on? Can you hear me now? Yeah. I look at it actually as in hiring people. We found it at our company, Boston Scientific, very difficult to find people who had a system thinking basis. You'd have to have science knowledge, but also you have to be able to integrate it. And I remember very early on we developed our own sort of tests for evaluating people. And we actually had, believe it or not, college graduates come and look at a drawing and give them a tool to measure it. And they would take a ruler that was much shorter than the line they were going to measure, and as opposed to the other tools that were available. This was kind of frightening that people didn't have sort of the thinking common sense. They maybe had book learning, but not practical applied learning. And so I got very interested in saying, how can we do that? And I'll let it go there and come back to how I'm trying to help solve that problem.
Sure. I have to turn that on. Good morning, everyone. Wow. Good morning, everyone. I am a product of the New York City public schools. I grew up poor in New York City. Actually made a movie about my family for HBO. I followed my family. I'm one of 5 kids to graduate from high school. And the oldest of 5 to graduate from high school. So education is our only silver bullet, right? So it is really personal for me, the work. I was a teacher and a school principal and then an education reformer for the last, for about 16 years before I realized, you know, I could be happily middle class and really achieve nothing, and continue to do this work. And I realized that somewhere along the way that we know a lot about certain things in education. We know a lot about teaching, and we practice the art of teaching and we teach people how to teach, but we know very little about learning. So I became obsessed with how is it that people learn, and went to school to get a doctorate in the learning sciences, and wound up, believe it or not, in games. And the reason I wound up in games and learning is because for the last 30 years, learning scientists have been exploring how people learn. And it turns out that game designers are following a lot of the same principles that we've been learning about for the last 30 years. So my work now is focused in that space. I work at the Gates Foundation, leading a portfolio on games and learning and social networking technologies. But that's my journey to here.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Start the next segment?
Well, let me talk about it, and it's actually building off one of the things that you said and one of the things that we spoke about. And it's perfect that we're all sitting here in this forum, because when you go back and you look year after year after year, we all learned the same way, right? You all sat the way you did, looking forward. In front there was a teacher that was teaching you, all in our desks facing one direction, and that has been the same when you go back and you look at classrooms 5, 10, 15, 50, 100 years, right? It was the same look, the same feel. We taught people in the same way. And here we are, and you hear this dynamic conversation from Laura, and you hear what we can do with technology, and yet that's still how we teach students, in that same one-dimensional way, facing the person who's talking and talking at them. So what can change about that? What needs to change? How will changing that be a part of changing some of the issues that we have with education? And John, if you want to start, because I know we had this conversation as well.
Yeah, the story about being the same as the 2,000-year-old man, who came back, and the only thing they recognized was how people were taught. And how many of you know Dean Kamen? Raise your hand. How many of you know FIRST? FIRST, for those of you who don't know, is an acronym. It stands for Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology. And it's a program that was started by Dean Kamen about 20 years ago. Actually, the National Academies of Science, there are several of them, wrote a report about 30 years ago called Rise Above the Gathering Storm. And it was about the conditions of our schools today, what they are doing, and the fact that we as a country, in the US anyway, have been falling behind other countries, and particularly in the sciences. And they were very concerned, and they wrote another program, a report, 25 years later, and it was amazing. Things had actually gotten worse, despite the fact that they were raising the attention here. Dean is an inventor's inventor. He's the father of the Segway, the two-wheel self-balancing scooter. But in fact, he's invented a lot of other things that have enabled him to do lots of neat stuff. He's got a technique for purifying water, and he mixes his philanthropic and his business issues very well. And he decided to get a lot of business colleagues together to see if they could come up with a way to change the mindset of kids on learning. Is there something we can do to focus on the demand side rather than on the supply side? And that is what FIRST is all about. It's a game. It's a competition, but it's actually a co-opetition. I'll explain that in more detail in a second. But basically, in order to win, you actually have to collaborate with your competitor. That's not a bad thing. And this game, now we have robotic games that go all the way down to grade school, but basically it's K-12. And the idea is to make it cool to be able to play the game well. And in order to play the game well, you have to understand science and technology. Surprise, surprise. Cool is different than fun. Being cool in school is being admired by others. Unfortunately, science and technology frequently is boring, hard to do, and it's not obvious how it's going to be used. And even more important, it can be the death knell of your social life, particularly for young women, by the way. So Dean set out to change that, and he created this game, and he said, this is the way we're going to get kids to want to do this. We are going to find celebrities. They may be business folks, but they also may be people that kids are likely to know. And that's athletes and rap singers. And so will.i.am, as it turns out, is a huge supporter. Larry Page and Sergey Brin are huge supporters of First. And the support is one thing, but their visible support, the fact that they come and tell the kids, hey, number one, I'm not older than you, that much older than you, and I used to play with Legos just like you're doing now, and look what can happen. And it is a way to change the mindset, not just of an individual, but of a group. A lot of people said, well, aren't you just going to get all geeks? Well, first of all, geeks aren't so bad nowadays, but the fact of the matter is we design the game so that, in fact, it requires athletic people. It requires people who are English majors and arts majors. So when you go to one of these competitions, and it's very much like any sport, our championship is played, last year was in the Jones Dome in St. Louis. We'll have 50,000 screaming kids there. It's sort of part basketball, part rock concert, because music and noise is critical. It was great to have will.i.am, because he actually threw in a concert on top of that. And by the way, this was on his nickel, not ours, because he believes in the value of this, the value of getting everybody to realize this is one of the few sports where everybody can turn professional.
Well, and John, let me ask, so I think building on that, from the whole game perspective, how, Robert, did you get into this, that games were a way in which to have the classroom or to have the education experience different? And what are some of the things that you've seen or that the Gates Foundation has invested in because of knowing that?
Yeah. So one thing I think that in the education space that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we actually trying to solve for? And one of the things we're solving for is that, Laura said it so well, so many of our kids are dropping out of school. In this city, 50% of low-income kids drop out of school. And so we're really solving for this huge problem of kids just feeling so alienated from school. And so we then have to think, how might we create environments? And while that many kids are dropping out of school, 97% of kids in this country between the ages of 8 and 18 are playing games. So, which is pretty crazy, right? It's pretty astronomical, that number. So one thing that we ask ourselves in our work is, how do we solve for high engagement and high cognitive demand, right? And it turns out that games can create these conditions, highly immersive conditions, where we can do both those things, solve for high cognitive demand and high engagement. So how many in the room have heard of the game Fold It? Oh, good, not many. So let me tell you a little bit about Fold It. It's a game that we're working with the engine of that game right now. It's a biochemistry game, and so Laura said something really great this morning. Among one of the many great things she said was that we need to make problem solving go viral, right? So imagine if that were what education were about. That we would place our kids in the space where they're problem solvers, and we issue those contemporary problems out into the world, and that makes up the curriculum, right? So Fold It is a game that just does just that. It's a game where 200,000 kids, 100,000 players are playing. It's a global community, many in the U.S. And so it's a biochemistry game where it's a partnership between the gamers and real scientists at the University of Washington. And so what they do is they can't solve certain problems related to folding proteins, which is pretty esoteric, right? But this game actually creates the conditions where you learn competencies related to biochemistry. And then has this adaptive engine and engages you in a way where you actually learn these skills related to folding proteins. So something really, really remarkable happened back in September, where well, it was published then. So a challenge was put out to the gamers to solve the protein structure of an enzyme that causes AIDS that scientists could not solve for 15 years. The gamers solved it in 3 weeks. So that just needs to sort of sit with you for a moment, right? That games can create the conditions that are immersive enough, right, where kids and people, and the leader of that group of 15 kids, and it was a collaboration, had no background in science. So that we can create the conditions that are immersive enough where people are learning how to do solve complex problems and create those learning pathways. So that is one of the reasons. Again, it's not like games are, you know, I have a friend who says that 95%, an artist friend who says 95% of art is really bad. And he uses much stronger language than that. We're also going to get a lot of games like that, right? And so what we have to be careful of is that we are really watchful that games aren't just another consumption thing where we're giving kids information or that they're skill and drill, that they are actually immersing kids in solving very complicated problems.
Peter, kind of building off of that, PwC and certainly many other companies are very big supporter of Donors Choose, a way in which a company can have individuals, and like you were saying before with the Donors Choose cards, can actually get into a classroom, and typically a classroom that they were actually in the past, and so really make a change for a teacher. When you hear about these types of tools that have the potential to really change the way children learn, is that what teachers are looking for, or how do you connect the dots between some progressive things that might be out there in education and how you can help to educate and put those tools in the hands of teachers?
So before I answer the question, I don't know who this young woman is who just handed me this note, but apparently she wrestled the dog to the ground, and so I appreciate that. So the Donors Choose giving cards are going to be given out at the first coffee break, so please enjoy them. So first of all, I wish I'd had a teacher like you, and I wish I'd had FIRST when I was a high school student, so I'm feeling bad. But in any case, in specific answer to your question, one of the obvious answers, and you know, we all know, everyone in this room understands how complex that question is and how hard the answer is and how multi-determined it is. If you can really unlock the potential of individual great teachers like Robert, we all know, and I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced that themselves of having, I'm sure everyone could name a teacher who affected their lives. And so through DonorsChoose.org, we've had amazing connections. PwC is one, but for instance, Crate & Barrel discovered, they distributed over 2 million Donors Choose giving cards and discovered that those recipients of Donors Choose giving cards spent 8% more at Crate & Barrel stores than those who didn't. So we were able to energize Crate & Barrel to reach into their local communities and directly connect with those teachers. Same thing happened at Sonic. Sonic Burger had this great promotion where we didn't give them money. Sonic customers could vote on their favorite DonorsChoose.org proposal. We had hundreds of thousands of Sonic customers vote. Those customers spent 5% more at Sonic than the people who didn't vote. So one of the things we've been able to do is energize corporations to reach into the community. And now I'd like to tell just a quick story. So DonorsChoose.org is all about scalability. We've raised about $116 million on our website for individual proposals. We've reached half of all public schools in the United States. We've had over 1 million donations, and we've reached almost over 6 million students. But I want to tell you the story of one student because about once a week at DonorsChoose.org, we get a story that literally makes us cry. I'm going to try and get through this one without crying. So we always measure, and to Laura's point, I thought Laura had a fantastic point about the ability to measure impact. We can measure direct impact in the classroom, but every once in a while you get a proposal you can't measure. We had a donor call us, and he was hysterical. And when we calmed him down, he explained that he had funded a proposal on DonorsChoose.org for $400 for a young woman. The teacher had wanted this woman to play in the school orchestra, and because she was disabled, she needed an assistive device to play in the orchestra. And this is the part, well, choke up. And when he didn't really understand what was going to happen, he funded the proposal. And the young woman got to play in the school orchestra for the first time. And at DonorsChoose.org, every single person, including every one of you who uses our free money on the site, will get feedback from the teachers and the students. And the teacher wrote back to this donor and said, the day that she played was a day that you changed the lives of every single person in the room. You changed her life, you changed the life of every student, and you changed the life of every parent in that room. So I think that there's a way for individuals to profoundly impact large groups of people through technology.
The education topic is one that we hear a lot about. I was talking earlier to other people who in the last 2 weeks were at different STEM conferences, and certainly we had some conversations about it yesterday. So we talk a lot about this, but I think it's hard to figure out as an individual, you know, besides if you're going to fund one of the different projects, or if you're a corporation that has large ability to scale and a lot of money, what do you do? Like, what's that first step to cross into this education space? Because when you look at corporations, for the most part, right, they're not experts in this area. And yet they want to give, but they don't know where to give. And sometimes just given might not be the right thing to do. What do you say to people of how do they really navigate that landmine, both as individuals who really want to be able to make a difference, as well as corporations who are saying, okay, we'll be in the game, but you need to tell us what should we be measuring for, where should we be targeting, how should we be rolling this out, who should we be talking to? What would you tell them?
So since I just spoke, I'll turn it over to Robert. John.
I'll take a shot at that because that's obviously something, right, that is very sensitive to any company. How do you help out? How does it help you by helping others? One of the things was first that Dean pushed for was he would like to get contributions that weren't from their philanthropic, but actually from the departments. Now, consider, if you're a business that operates in a community, then your relationship with the community is very, very important, and hiring good employees is very, very important, and actually having children of employees who are motivated is perhaps one of the most valuable things you can do, obviously to the family, but also to the community. And in many cases, the engineering departments do it. In other cases, it's the HR groups that arrange to do this thing. It's not just a matter of giving dollars. We have 3,500 corporations that support FIRST. It's about 300,000 kids. So, you know, that's an impressive number of companies that are involved. But the companies do it because they are learning as well as the kids they're trying to help. Not just by donating, but by providing mentors to the student teams. And in fact, in some cases, in the case of General Motors, in the case of NASA, in the case of Boeing, in the case of Rockwell Automation, these companies regard mentoring a first team as sort of graduate school. You have to learn to deal with the school politics. You have to deal with the community. And in fact, one of the great awards, and first is all about you are what you celebrate, and we focus on that. But one of the biggest awards we give has nothing to do with robots. Robots are a vehicle for the process. The award we give, the Chairman's Award, is for that team that has had the biggest impact on its community, the school and the community itself. And they go out and they do fundraising, of course. They will pick a social problem and they will solve it, kind of fold-it style, crowdsourcing not only within their community but outside the community. Learning to use these skills is going to be valuable no matter what you do in life, whether it's for your company, whether it's for your community or your government.
So it's a great question, and I might give an odd answer. So I think that with the way that we can learn now, we really have to think about, I think companies and anyone interested in learning should be thinking about what is the future of learning institutions? And that should be our big question. What should learning institutions look like? And one thing that would be really beneficial from companies is to kind of get under the hood and understand what are the competencies to be able to work in your company. So what are the 5 to 10 competencies that, an engineer in your company needs to be masterful, or an auditor, or a strategist at Pricewater, right? And so what we can do then, what we are able to do now is design learning pathways, anytime, anywhere learning pathways, right? So we take those competencies and then populate through social networking environments. We can populate those pathways with assets, such as games, such as an online course, right? And so what we want to think about is what are the novice to expert trajectories for those competencies? And that will make it much easier to be able to create these pathways and to design for them. So it's an odd answer, but believe it or not, that's where we are now. If we're trying to really crack the nut, and then the other part of that is how do we legitimize people once they complete a pathway? So a lot of our work is around badging. So I'll give you an example. We are working with NASA to create an engineering badge that would be validated by NASA. So we're working with different game companies and different folks so that we can design a pathway around engineering that at the end of that pathway, if you've mastered the competencies necessary to be a NASA engineer, you get a NASA-validated badge. And so, along the way, you've solved complex problems related to that pathway. You get a NASA-validated badge. And you also prove that you actually know know something, know a set of skills and are able to do something very specific. So it really redefines the university credential and do we need it? I'm not saying that we don't, but it really asks that question. And also the high school. And so the high school credential. So I think one thing that we need to do is make transparent in your own companies. What are those competencies? And let's make them transparent. And let's engage people who are great designers to create those trajectories. One place that's doing this, there's a great new organization called Brave New Talent that's working with Facebook and Google and really trying to understand those competencies. There's an organization called iRemix. It's a social networking environment that is doing the same thing at the high school level. So it's really, the question is, what is the future of learning and how might we get there?
And Peter, what do you think?
So I have to ask, is there an age limit on the NASA badge?
Well, that's what's so great. So that you can get it, from age 1 to 100, like that. So that
You're in.
And will you call my wife and let her know this is what I'm going to spend my time on? I'm going to answer very quickly with two things. One might get me kicked out of the room. I wish I was closer to the door, and I know this is going to anger some people in the room. But if we've learned a lesson from Etsy, from Kickstarter, from eBay, and from DonorsChoose.org, it's that ideas are a marketplace, just like anything else, an education marketplace. To John, to your point, when we go into a corporation, we do not generally talk to the corporate philanthropy department. We do talk to the operating units and the marketing department, but we cast it as a marketplace of ideas, and corporations really understand the concept of a marketplace. A marketplace is an environment where you can constantly test, you can constantly refine, you can constantly refocus. And so I think that's the answer we use about education, but of course that is a controversial perspective. The other thing I wanted to point out as a technologist is that we're seeing more and more examples, all of us in this room, of intelligence being pushed out to the edge. So the old model of centralization is now becoming decentralized. Laura made some great points about this. And so the last point I'll make in answer to the question is, corporations are starting to understand as well that pushing these ideas of intelligence out to the edge is really a way to enable their corporate mission. And so that's the other way that we try and educate people about how they, as a corporation or as individuals, can empower an educational transformation by pushing it out to the edge and letting that intelligence live where it deserves to live, which is in the classroom with the teachers and with the students.
Well, thank you. And with that, we're going to conclude this panel. But I hope that you see that one of the things that we're hoping to get out of the panel is really a different way of looking at these things and some tangible ideas of how we can walk away as individuals and at companies of addressing these things differently, and hopefully a lot of resources that we can network with over the day and into the future that can help us, because I think these ideas are ones that will fit into most of our lives and most of our organizations. So thank you all, gentlemen.